I have been married to the same woman for 31 years. 31 years. I want you to hold that number for a moment, not because it is unusually long, though it is longer than many, but because of what 31 years actually means. It means you have seen each other at the absolute bottom. You have sat together in hospital waiting rooms and at kitchen tables where the numbers didn't add up and beside graves you weren't ready to stand beside. You have had arguments so fierce that the walls seemed to lean away from them. You have laughed at things no one else would find funny because no one else has the same 31 years of shared context. You have become, in the truest possible sense, the architecture of each other's lives that I so woven in that pulling one thread would unravel something essential in the other. My wife's name is Miriam, and on a Tuesday afternoon in October, I received a voice note from my daughter that made the blood leave my face so fast I had to put one hand on the wall of the break room to stay upright. It was not a message. It was not words, really. It was just Grace, my daughter, 29 years old. Composure like her mother, steady like her mother. It was Grace, completely undone, saying through tears, "Daddy, please come. Please just come home right now." Nothing else. 12 seconds of audio. I was already moving before it finished playing. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from. Your city, your country, because what I am about to walk you through is the kind of story that needs witnesses. It needs people sitting with it, so let me know you are here. And then do not go anywhere, because this story turns in ways you will not see coming, and every single turn matters. Let me tell you something about my son before I tell you what he did. Because the mistake people always make with stories like this is to assume the villain was always a villain, that there were signs from the beginning, that a person like this announces themselves early in childhood cruelties or small betrayals, or the kind of coldness that is visible from far enough away that a paying attention parent would have caught it. It is not always like that. Victor was a good boy. I mean that without qualification and without the soft-focused nostalgia that fathers sometimes use to avoid the truth. He was genuinely good, curious, generous in the way that children are generous, when it has never occurred to them to be otherwise, quick to laugh, loyal to his friends in the way that boys are loyal, when loyalty is still something they understand by instinct rather than calculation. I coached his little league team for 4 seasons. I drove him to every practice, every game, every tournament that took us 3 hours from home on a Saturday morning when I would rather have been sleeping. I did it because he loved it, and because there is a version of love that expresses itself entirely through presence, through showing up again and again in ways that your child will not fully understand until they are old enough to understand what showing up actually costs. I paid for his college. I co-signed his first apartment. When he met Sasha, his wife, a woman with the very specific quality of a person who is always assessing the room they are in, I welcomed her. I was careful. I was not unkind. When they married, I danced at the wedding, and I meant the toast I gave, every word of it. I am telling you this because I need you to understand the weight of what Tuesday afternoon in October actually cost me. This was not a stranger. This was not someone I had seen clearly all along and foolishly trusted anyway. This was Victor, my son. And he had chosen a Tuesday afternoon in October while I was at work to walk into my house, the house where his mother had cooked 31 years of dinners and nursed 31 years of small disasters, and tell Miriam that the property deed had been transferred into Sasha's name and that she had 1 hour to gather what she needed and leave. He had a document. I will tell you about the document shortly. But first, I need to tell you about the drive home. I have driven that route from the plant to my house 400 times if I have driven it once. 17 minutes on a good day, 22 with lights. I know every turn, every pothole, every place where the road dips slightly, and your stomach lifts a fraction of a second behind the car. I drove it in 11 minutes that Tuesday, and I will not be answering questions about that. What I will tell you is what happened inside that car, because I did not panic. I want to be very clear about that. Not because I am the kind of man who needs you to think well of him, but because understanding that I did not panic is essential to understanding everything that comes after. Panic is noise. Panic is motion without direction. Panic is what happens when you let the feeling overtake the thinking, and I have spent 64 years learning that the moment you most want to panic is precisely the moment you most cannot afford to. What I did instead was think. I thought about a conversation I had had with my attorney 11 months earlier. A conversation that had begun, as many important conversations do, with something small. A question Miriam had asked me about what would happen to the house if something happened to both of us. A routine question. The kind that spouses ask when they are being practical and responsible, and quietly acknowledging the fact that neither of them will live forever. I had called my attorney the following week. His name is Donald Pierce. He is 70 years old, has been practicing estate and property law for 41 years, and has the quality, rare and invaluable, of telling you what you do not want to hear with the same equanimity that he delivers the good news. I trust him completely. I had asked Donald a question during that call that at the time had felt almost hypothetical. Almost, I said, Donald, if someone were to try to manipulate a property deed, forge one, transfer one fraudulently, what would that look like, and how hard would it be to undo? Donald had been quiet for a moment. Then he said, Walter, is there something specific you're concerned about? I said, not yet. He said, but potentially. I said, let's call it instinct. Another pause. Then Donald said something I wrote down and kept. He said, instinct built on 40 years of paying attention is not instinct, Walter. It's evidence you haven't fully assembled yet. He was right. And over the following 11 months, quietly, without telling Miriam, without telling Grace, without telling a single person in my orbit, I had started assembling. I thought about all of this during those 11 minutes on the road home. And by the time I pulled into my driveway, the panic that might have owned me had been replaced by something else entirely, something colder. Something that knew exactly what it was doing and was not the least bit interested in being talked out of it. I found Miriam in the hallway, not in the kitchen, not in the sitting room. In the hallway, that narrow strip of space between the front door and the rest of the house, the place you pass through on the way to somewhere, the place no one stands still in. She was standing completely still. She was holding her house keys, both hands, clasped around them the way a person holds something they are afraid will be taken. The way you hold something when the taking has already been announced, and the only thing left is the clock running down. She looked up when I came through the door, and this is the part that I have gone back to more times than I can count. She looked relieved. Not the relief of someone who thinks the situation has changed. The relief of someone who was simply afraid of facing it alone and now does not have to. She said, Raymond. Just my name, just that. I looked at her. I looked at her hands. I looked at the keys. And something happened in my chest that I do not have a precise word for. It was not rage, though rage was in the room. It was not grief, though grief was there too. It was something older and more absolute than either of those things. The feeling of a man who has just seen something that cannot be unseen and who understands with complete clarity that the next decision he makes will define the rest of the story. Crossed the hallway in 4 steps. I gently opened her hands. I took the keys. I looked at them for 1 second. The front door key, the side gate key, the little brass one for the garden shed that Miriam's mother had given us when we first moved in, and which neither of us could ever bring ourselves to replace even after the locket fit, had long since rusted shut. And then I placed every single key back into Miriam's palm, closed her fingers around them, and held both her hands in mine. I said very quietly, "This is your home. Nobody is taking it." She started to say something. I held her hands tighter. I said, "Where is he?" She said, "The sitting room, Raymond. He has a document." "He said the deed." I said, "I know about the document." She stopped. She looked at me with those eyes, the ones I have been looking into for 31 years, that I know better than I know my own face, and something shifted in them, a question forming. Something she did not yet have the words for. I said, "Go put the kettle on. I need 5 minutes." She held my gaze for another moment. Then she went to put the kettle on, and I walked into the sitting room to face my son. If you are watching this right now, and you have a parent, a father, a mother, a grandparent, someone who built something, who showed up, who drove to every practice and meant every toast and co-signed things they didn't have to co-sign because they believed in you, and you have not called them this week, not a text, not a like on a photo, a call, their voice, yours. I need you to stop this video right now and make that call. Because Miriam stood in that hallway alone, for however long it took Grace's voice note to reach me, and however long it took me to drive home, and she stood there holding keys to her own home like a woman who had lost the right to use them, and no parent, no husband. No human being who has given 31 years of themselves to building a life should ever stand alone in a hallway holding their own keys. Call them, then come back. Because what happened in that sitting room is something you are not prepared for. And what I found in that document, the document Victor was so certain about, is going to change the entire shape of this story. Subscribe to Dad's Dark Revenge right now if you haven't already, because you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Victor was standing at the window, not sitting, standing, which told me something about his state of mind. A man who sits is a man who is comfortable. A man who stands at a window is a man who has been waiting, who has been rehearsing, who has been running through what he was going to say when I arrived, and organizing it into something he believed was airtight. Sasha was on the sofa. She had her legs crossed and her phone in her hand, and the composed expression of a woman who has been waiting for this particular day for long enough that she had made peace with the anticipation of it. She did not look up when I entered. That was deliberate. Sasha does nothing without deliberateness. I had understood that about her long before I understood what she was deliberate about. I stood in the doorway of my own sitting room. I looked at the furniture. The couch Miriam had picked out 12 years ago, the lamp from her mother's house, the framed photographs above the fireplace of Miriam and me on our 20th anniversary. Standing somewhere in Portugal with the sea behind us, both of us slightly sunburned and laughing at something the photographer had said. My house, my life, my 31 years of built and accumulated and chosen things. I looked at my son standing at my window, and I understood, in a way I had not fully understood even during 11 months of preparation, that he had looked at all of this, all of it, and seen not a home but an asset, not a life but a balance sheet, not his mother but a variable to be managed. I breathed once, deliberately. Then I walked in. Victor turned when I came in. He said, "Dad," I said, Victor. He said, I know this is a lot to process, but I need you to understand that everything we've done is legal. We have a property attorney. The documentation is solid. He reached for a folder on the coffee table and held it out toward me. The deed transfer is legitimate. It went through 6 weeks ago. This house. I know when it went through. He paused, just slightly. The pause of a man whose rehearsed speech has just encountered its first unscripted moment. I watched it happen, in real time, the slight recalibration behind his eyes, the half-second where the confidence flickered and then steadied again, because he had not yet understood the full shape of what I was telling him. He said, You knew? I said, 6 weeks ago, Thursday. Donald Pierce called me at 7:40 in the morning. The folder stayed in his hand, but something changed in his grip on it. Sasha looked up from her phone. First time since I had entered the room. I noticed that too. I said, Sit down, Victor. He did not sit down immediately. There was a beat, the beat of a man deciding whether compliance is weakness, and then he sat, which told me his confidence, whatever remained of it, was already making concessions it did not want to make. I need to explain something here, because this is the part of the story that I want you to understand with absolute clarity. 11 months before that Tuesday, after my conversation with Donald about instinct and assembled evidence, I had put something in motion, not loudly, not confrontationally, the way I do everything that matters. Quietly, methodically, with the patience of a man who understands that the most powerful moves are the ones that are never announced until they are already complete. I had worked with Donald to establish a legal instrument, a specific form of property protection tied to our marital estate that meant any attempted transfer of the deed on our primary residence without both signatures would trigger an automatic legal flag at the county recorder's office. The moment a transfer was filed, Donald received a notification. 6 weeks before that Tuesday, the notification came. Victor and Sasha's attorney had filed a deed transfer based on a document that purported to show Miriam's signature authorizing the move. The signature was forged. Donald had the notification in his hands by 7:30 Thursday morning. He had called me by 7:40. And I had spent the 6 weeks between that phone call and this Tuesday afternoon doing something that Victor, with all his planning and all his documents and all his careful patience, had never once imagined his father was capable of. I had built the response, complete, documented, airtight in the way that only becomes possible when you have 11 months of preparation and a 70-year-old attorney who finds fraud cases personally offensive and therefore prosecutes them with the energy of someone half his age. Let me tell you what those 6 weeks looked like, because I want you to understand that this was not reactive. I was not scrambling. I was not a man who had received a phone call and panicked into action. I was a man who had been ready for this moment for nearly a year and who spent 6 weeks ensuring that when it finally arrived, every door Victor thought he was walking through had already been bricked over from the other side. Donald and I met 3 times in those 6 weeks. In his office, with the door closed and the particular quality of focused quiet that Donald brings to everything. The air of a man who has been in consequential rooms for so long that he carries that quality with him wherever he goes. We went through the forged document in detail. The documents expert Donald had engaged produced his report in the 3rd week, 41 pages, meticulous, written in the clear language of someone who has testified in court enough times to know that clarity is the only thing that survives cross-examination. We filed the protective instruments. We notified the county recorder. We prepared the fraud response. We had a conversation with Detective Serrano. A preliminary conversation, informal, the kind that plants the seed without watering it yet, so that when the time came, he would already know the shape of what was coming. And every single day of those 6 weeks, I came home to Miriam. I sat across from her at dinner. I watched the news with her on the sofa. I listened to her talk about Grace and the baby and the garden and the small machinery of our daily life, and I said nothing. Not because I did not trust her, but because trust sometimes looks like protecting someone from a weight they do not yet need to carry. I know that is a difficult thing to agree with. I know there are people watching this who would say that Miriam deserved to know, that keeping it from her was its own kind of decision she had not consented to. I have thought about this. I have sat with it honestly. And what I keep coming back to is this. The 6 weeks I spent building response were 6 weeks of Miriam's life that she spent in peace. Cooking, gardening, talking to Grace. Living in her home without the knowledge that someone was trying to take it from her. I could not undo what Victor had set in motion, but I could decide exactly how much of it touched her and for how long. That was the decision I made. I said none of this to Victor yet. What I said was, "Put the folder down." He looked at me. I said, "Victor, put it down." He put it down. What happened over the next 72 hours is something I am going to walk you through carefully, because the sequence matters and the details matter, and I do not want you to miss a single piece of it. Donald Pierce filed the fraud response the following morning. The forged signature had already been examined by a documents expert Donald had engaged 6 weeks earlier. From the moment the notification came in, the expert's report was 41 pages. It was, Donald told me, one of the cleaner cases of signature forgery he had seen in 4 decades, by which he meant it was clean enough to have fooled a casual examiner, but not remotely clean enough to survive professional scrutiny. The county recorder's office was notified. The fraudulent transfer was flagged and frozen pending investigation. Victor and Sasha's attorney, a young man, Donald told me, who seemed genuinely unaware that his clients had given him a forged document to work with, withdrew from the case within 48 hours of receiving Donald's filing. Detective work, it turns out, moves faster when the evidence is already assembled and waiting. A detective named Serrano came to speak with me on the Thursday. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Victor had sat as a child, doing homework, eating cereal, building the small habitual infrastructure of a life that I had believed was built on something solid, and he asked me to walk him through the timeline. I walked him through it, all of it, 11 months of it, every call with Anna Donald, every document, every quiet step taken in the direction of protection while life continued on the surface exactly as it always had. Miriam making dinner, Grace calling on Undays, Victor and Sasha coming to holidays, with their practiced smiles and their longer game running underneath everything like a current you could not see until you knew to look for it. I told Serrano about the Christmas dinner 3 years ago, the casual question about downsizing, the way Sasha had watched me for the answer. I told him about the instinct it had planted and the 11 months of quiet assembly that followed. I told him about Donald's notification system and the Thursday morning call 6 weeks ago. I told him about the 6 weeks of building the response in silence, while Miriam went about her life in the house that someone was trying to take from her. Serrano had a particular way of listening, very still, pen moving in small, precise strokes, eyes rarely leaving my face. I got the impression he was a man who trusted what he saw as much as what he heard, who was watching for the thing underneath the words. At some point during the account, Grace came into the kitchen. She had been in the sitting room with Miriam, keeping her company in the careful way that a daughter keeps her mother company when she knows something difficult is happening in the next room and has decided the most useful thing she can do is simply be present. Grace stopped in the kitchen doorway when she saw Serrano. Then she looked at me. I said, "It's fine, Grace. This is Detective Serrano. He's helping us." She looked at Serrano the way her mother looks at people, direct, assessing, not unkind, but not performing warmth she didn't feel. Then she sat down at the far end of the table without being asked, as if she had decided without discussion that she was part of this now and was not going anywhere. I appreciated that. I did not say so at the time. I said so later. When I finished, Serrano looked at his notes for a moment. Then he said, "Mr. Raymond, how long ago did you first suspect something was wrong?" I thought about it honestly. Then I said, "The day Sasha asked me, at Christmas dinner 3 years ago, whether Miriam and I had ever considered downsizing." He looked up from his notes. I said, "It was a casual question, pleasant. She was very good at casual and pleasant. But something underneath it, the specific framing of it, the way she watched me for the answer, told me something. I couldn't have told you what, but I knew." Serrano nodded slowly. The nod of a man who has sat across from enough people to know when he is hearing the truth. He said, "What did you do with that?" I said, "I called my attorney the following week." Grace made a small sound at the end of the table. Not a word, just a breath of recognition. The sound of a daughter learning something about her father that reordered the picture she had of him. Serrano closed his notebook. He said, "Mr. Raymond, in 30 years of this work, I have sat across from a lot of people who believed they were protecting their families. Most of them were reacting. You were not reacting." I said, "No," he said. "That is going to matter." He was right. I need to pause here for one moment. Because right now, somewhere in the audience watching this, there is a person who knows something is wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not the kind of wrong that announces itself with eviction notices and forged documents. The quiet kind of wrong. The kind that lives in a specific question asked at a Christmas dinner, in a look held a half-second too long, in a pattern of small things that individually mean nothing, but collectively mean something you cannot yet name. You already know. The question is whether you are going to do something about it before it becomes a Tuesday in October. Walter waited 11 months. He moved quietly. He built a wall that his son ran directly into at full speed and did not even see until it was too late. If you have that feeling, that specific low-frequency alarm that your gut has been sending you and that your heart keeps overriding because the alternative is too painful to sit with, listen to it. Do something with it. Talk to someone you trust. Make the call. Build the quiet thing that nobody sees until it is needed, and subscribe to Dad's Dark Revenge right now. Because we tell these stories precisely so that the people watching them go home and protect the people they love before they are standing in a hallway holding keys. Victor and Sasha were formally charged 7 weeks after that Tuesday. Forgery of legal documents, fraud, attempted property theft. The list was longer than I expected and shorter than Donald had initially suggested it might be, because Victor, when his attorney withdrew and the reality of what was assembled against him became visible, made the decision to cooperate. I do not know what that decision cost him. I can imagine in the abstract what it means to cooperate against your own spouse. I can imagine in the abstract what that room looks like and what that conversation sounds like and what it costs a person to make that particular trade, to sit across from a detective and dismantle, piece by piece, the story that the two of you had built together, to become the evidence against the person you chose, I choose to spend very little time imagining it. What I know is that Sasha did not cooperate. What I know is that her attorney mounted a defense that Donald described with the closest thing to amusement that Donald ever produces as optimistic. What I know is that the 41-page documents report, combined with 11 months of careful preparation, combined with the notification system that had been running quietly for 6 weeks before the Tuesday that was supposed to destroy my family, that all of it together made the case not a puzzle to be solved, but a picture to be read. Courts read it. I was not in that courtroom when the reading happened. Miriam asked me if I wanted to go, and I said no. Not because I was afraid of what I would feel, because I had already felt it, all of it, every shade and temperature of it, in the 11 months of quiet work, in the 17-minute drive, in the hallway where I found my wife holding her keys. What happened in that courtroom was the consequence. The work had already been done. Miriam asked me about 3 weeks after it was over why I had never told her. We were sitting on the back porch. October again, a year later, the same quality of light that had been there on that tustude. The low amber, tell the truth kind of light that October produces like no other month. She had a cup of tea, I had coffee. The garden was doing the slow, dignified thing it does in autumn, which is to say it was letting go of things without making a fuss about it. She said, 11 months, Raymond. You knew something was wrong for 11 months, and you didn't tell me. I said, no. She looked at me. I said, I didn't know something was wrong. I suspected it. And I knew that if I told you what I suspected, one of two things would happen. Either you wouldn't believe me, which would have been painful, or you would believe me, which would have been worse, because then you would have spent 11 months carrying it, and I couldn't do that to you. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, what if you had been wrong? I said, then Donald would have billed me for 11 months of unnecessary caution, and I would have paid it gladly and never mentioned it to anyone. She looked at me for another long moment, the way she has been looking at me for 31 years, with that specific combination of exasperation and certainty that I have come to understand is in her language what love sounds like. Then she said, you are the most infuriating man I have ever known. I said, you have mentioned that, she said. I mean it as a compliment. I said, I know. We sat there until the light changed. Grace came for dinner the following Sunday. She brought her husband, a good man named Theo, who builds furniture by hand and speaks carefully and has my complete and unconditional approval, which I have told him exactly once, which is enough. They brought the baby, 8 months old, heavy and delighted with himself, with Grace's eyes and Theo's calm. I held him on the back porch after dinner, while Miriam and Grace washed dishes and talked in the kitchen the way women who love each other talk, at speed, overlapping, with laughter coming through the window in waves. The baby looked at me with the wide, uncomplicated attention of someone for whom the world is still entirely new and entirely acceptable. I said very quietly, so only he could hear, you are going to be fine. You have good people. He grabbed my finger. I have been grabbed by a lot of things in 64 years. Contracts, deadlines, fears, griefs, the particular grip of a situation that has you before you have it. Nothing has ever held on quite the way that baby held on in the October light on that back porch. I thought about Victor. I thought about what had been lost, not the house, not the deed, not the 11 months of legal machinery. What had been lost was the version of my son that I had believed in. The boy in the Little League uniform, the young man at the altar, the person I had written a toast for and meant every word. That version was gone. And I was 64 years old, and I did not have the luxury of pretending otherwise. But I had this. The baby's grip on my finger. Miriam's laugh coming through the window. Grace's voice telling a story that I could not fully hear, but that Miriam was finding hilarious. Theo at the kitchen table drinking the good coffee I had made specifically because he appreciates good coffee. And that is the kind of thing a man notices about a son-in-law who is worth keeping. I had this. And this, all of it, the whole specific weight of it, was what I had been protecting for 11 months from the quiet darkness of someone else's plan. It was worth every single minute. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, I need to know you were here. Drop a comment right now, your city, your country, wherever you are in the world right now watching this. Let me know you were in the room for this one, because Raymond's story deserved witnesses, and you showed up. Subscribe to Dad's Dark Revenge if you haven't already. Like this video if what happened in that hallway hit something real in you. And come back next week, because the stories are not done. And the next one, I promise you, lands even harder than this.